Hello, and welcome to The Brief Insight, your go to podcast for breaking down the latest trends, research, and policies shaping our world. Whether you're passionate about sustainability, global economics, or emerging innovations, this is where we simplify complex ideas to keep you informed and inspired. If you enjoy what you hear, don't forget to like this episode, subscribe to our channel, and share it with anyone looking for insights that matter. We're here every Monday and Friday, so hit that notification bell to stay updated. Your support helps us grow and continue bringing you sharp, relevant content that sparks conversation. Thank you for tuning into The Brief Insight. Now let's dive into today's topic.
Okay, so are you ready to dive into something that might actually surprise you?
I'm ready.
The future of coal.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
You might be thinking coal. Seriously, isn't that a bit outdated?
Yeah. I mean, with all the talk about renewables and, moving away from fossil fuels,
Exactly.
it does seem a bit like old news.
But the thing is, the forecasts about coal demand are kind of all over the place.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you've got some experts saying that it's plateauing, others saying it's actually still going up, and then some are predicting a decline.
Wow. So it's a real mixed bag.
It is.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, it's enough to make your head spin trying to figure out what's actually going on.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And I think what's really fascinating is that these conflicting predictions just show how complicated the global energy landscape really is.
Absolutely.
There's so many different factors all pushing and pulling.
Yeah, like economic growth. You've got new technologies coming out all the time. Government policies are changing. Even something as unpredictable as the weather can have a huge impact. Exactly.
There's a lot to keep track of.
It really is.
Yeah.
So to try to make sense of all of this, we're going to be looking at 3 different reports.
Okay.
2 are pretty recent ones from the International Energy Agency, the IEA.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, and those were published in 2024.
Okay.
And then to give us kind of a historical perspective, we're also going to be looking way back to a report from the World Energy Council, that's the WEC.
Right.
And this one's from 2004.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay, so we're really going back in time a bit.
we are.
Yeah, I think looking back at that 2004 report will be really interesting, especially when we compare it to, all the latest data and predictions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think by the end of this deep dive, we'll have a much clearer understanding of all the different forces that are shaping coal's future.
Definitely. And hopefully our listeners will too.
Yeah, and then be able to kind of, form their own informed opinion.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's just jump right in.
Okay, let's do it.
The IEA's December 2024 report actually had something that I found pretty shocking. Oh, really?
Yeah, global coal demand actually hit a record high in 2024.
Wow, I wouldn't have guessed that.
I know, right?
With all the talk about moving away from coal.
Exactly. You'd think it would be on its way out.
Yeah.
But it reached a whopping 8.77 billion tons.
That's a lot of coal.
It is.
Yeah.
And it is surprising.
It is, given the, kind of worldwide push for cleaner energy sources.
Right.
So what's driving that increase?
Well, the report says it was mainly because of increased electricity consumption.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and especially in those rapidly developing economies like China and India.
Right.
Their economies are just growing so fast.
It absolutely.
They need a ton of energy.
Yeah.
And coal is currently supplying a lot of that.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Those economies are booming. They need power to keep things running.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. But this is where things get a little interesting.
Oh, okay.
Even though we hit this record high, both of those EA reports are saying that this demand is probably going to plateau in the coming years.
Huh. Interesting.
So are we seeing peak coal?
Well, it certainly looks that way.
Yeah.
And this is where I think the contrast with that 2004 report from the WC becomes really interesting.
Right.
Because back then, their prediction was just continued growth in coal demand throughout the whole 21st century.
Oh, wow.
And especially in developing nations,
Okay.
they really saw coal as a key ingredient for economic growth.
So what happened?
Right.
What changed between 2004 and now?
Well, the biggest thing, and it's a really big thing, is the rise of renewable energy sources.
Okay.
That 2004 report came out before solar and wind power really took off.
Right.
Back then, they just weren't as cost-effective or readily available as they are now.
I guess I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
How much the landscape has changed.
It's totally different.
Yeah.
They couldn't have predicted that.
Right.
But now it's changing everything.
So it sounds like renewables are really starting to challenge coal's dominance.
Oh, absolutely, especially when it comes to generating electricity. The IE reports emphasize how the expansion of solar and wind power, particularly in China and India, is playing a huge role in meeting their growing electricity demands.
Okay.
So even as their economies continue to grow, their reliance on coal is expected to level off.
That's good news.
It is. It's a positive sign.
Yeah.
But the IEA reports also mention something that kind of throws a wrench in things.
Oh, what's that?
Well, those renewables, as amazing as they are, they can be impacted by the weather in a way that coal isn't.
Right.
Yeah. So, the output of solar and wind power can fluctuate based on things like, how cloudy it is or how strong the wind is blowing.
It's not as consistent.
Exactly. And this variability can create these short-term shifts in coal demand as power grids have to adjust to keep the lights on.
Right. They have to balance things out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It definitely makes predicting things a bit trickier.
They even gave a specific example in one of the reports.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they said coal demand in China by 2027 could fluctuate by up to 140 million tons.
Wow. That's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's just because of those weather-related changes in how much renewable energy they can generate.
It just highlights how complex this whole system is.
Yeah.
We've got multiple energy sources all interacting with each other,
Right.
and it's definitely a more complex energy mix than we had in the past.
So it sounds like we've got this picture of global coal demand plateauing,
Right.
driven largely by, renewables and efficiency improvements.
Yeah, it's a big shift from what the WEC was predicting back in 2004.
Yeah, but we also use coal for a lot of other things besides just generating electricity.
You're absolutely right about that.
Right.
That WEC report actually does a really good job of highlighting that coal has this whole range of uses
Yeah.
that often get overlooked.
Like what?
Well, for instance, it's essential in a lot of industrial processes,
Okay.
like making steel.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And there's more.
I remember reading about the possibility of converting coal into like liquid fuels,
Oh, yeah.
almost like a synthetic oil.
Right. It's called coal liquefaction.
That's the one.
Yeah. And that's one of the alternative uses that the WEC report explores.
Okay.
And they also talk about how coal can be transformed into a bunch of other valuable products through this process called gasification.
So what is that exactly?
Well, essentially, it involves heating coal up to really high temperatures to produce a gas.
Okay.
And that gas can be used for all sorts of things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And the report even mentions this idea of a coal renaissance.
Oh, really?
Yeah, where the focus shifts from burning coal for energy to using it as like a raw material,
Huh.
like for chemical processing and stuff.
Wow, that's a pretty fascinating concept.
It is.
Yeah.
And the WEC report actually argues that because coal is relatively cheap compared to oil and gas,
Right.
these alternative uses could become much more attractive economically,
That makes sense.
especially in the long run.
Yeah.
So even if coal's role in electricity generation starts to decline,
Right.
it could kind of find this whole new life in these other applications.
It's like coal could reinvent itself
Exactly.
for a new era.
Yeah. It's a possibility worth thinking about.
It is, but it's important to remember that the future of coal isn't just determined by, market forces and demand.
Right.
Technology and government policies also play a huge role.
They absolutely do.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Okay.
What kinds of technologies are we talking about? And how much power do governments actually have to shape the future of coal? All right, so we're talking technology and government policies.
Okay.
It's like this whole web of factors that are influencing the future of coal, right?
Absolutely.
We've got the changing demand,
Right.
the rise of renewables, those alternative uses, and now we're adding technology and government policies into the mix.
A lot to consider.
It is.
Yeah.
So let's break it down a little further.
Good.
Starting with the tech side of things,
Right.
what kind of technologies are we even talking about here?
Well, it's interesting. Even back in 2004, that WEC report that we talked about,
Yeah.
they recognized the importance of what they called clean coal technologies. Okay. Clean coal technologies.
It sounds a bit like an oxymoron, I know.
It kind of does.
But the basic idea is to try and make using coal less harmful to the environment.
So how do you make coal cleaner?
Well, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot and it can be confusing.
Yeah.
Essentially, these technologies, they aim to reduce the environmental impact of coal,
Okay.
especially when it comes to air pollution and greenhouse gases.
Okay.
So one example is something called supercritical pulverized coal combustion.
Oh, wow.
I know it's a mouthful,
It is?
but basically it means they burn coal at really high temperatures and pressures,
Okay.
which makes the whole process more efficient.
So you're getting more energy out of each piece of coal.
Exactly.
That sounds good for efficiency, but does it actually reduce emissions?
Well, yeah, because higher efficiency means you need less coal overall to generate the same amount of electricity,
Right.
and that translates into fewer emissions.
Okay, that makes sense.
There's also another technology called integrated gasification combined cycle, or IGCC for short.
I like that better.
It's much easier to say,
It is.
but it's basically a fancy way of saying that they turn the coal into a gas first,
Okay.
which makes it much easier to clean up before they actually burn it.
So like filtering out the bad stuff before it goes up the chimney?
Exactly.
Okay, that's pretty impressive.
It is. It's really interesting technology.
Yeah, and it seems like these technologies could actually, clean up coal's image, so to speak.
I think so. And the WEC report also brought up this idea of technology transfer to developing countries.
Oh, right. What was that all about?
Well, their argument was that these cleaner coal technologies need to be made accessible to everyone,
Oh.
not just wealthy nations.
Right.
So if we want to see a real global shift towards, more sustainable coal use,
Wow.
everybody needs access to the best tools.
That makes sense.
So they advocated for more international cooperation and financial assistance
Okay.
to help share this knowledge and technology.
Like leveling the playing field a bit.
Says give everyone a chance to use coal more responsibly.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about governments.
Right.
How do their policies and regulations fit into all of this?
Well, government policies are absolutely crucial when it comes to shaping the energy landscape.
Okay.
We're talking about things like setting targets for reducing emissions,
Right.
putting a price on carbon, and, incentivizing the development of renewable energy sources.
Okay.
All of these policies can either accelerate or hinder the transition away from coal,
Okay.
depending on, how they're designed and implemented.
So governments can really nudge the market in one direction or the other.
Exactly. They have a lot of influence.
It sounds like it.
And that's why it's so important for citizens to stay informed and engaged.
Right.
And hold their policymakers accountable.
Okay.
The IEA and both of its reports really emphasize how much impact these policy decisions will have
Yeah.
on the future of coal demand.
So it's not just about technology or economics.
Right. It's political, too.
Yeah, it's all connected.
It is.
So we've got this kind of three-way tug of war going on.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
Technology, market trends, and government policies.
And the future of coal is hanging in the balance.
Exactly.
It's a good way to put it.
And I think it highlights why it's so hard to predict what's actually going to happen.
Absolutely.
Like there's so many moving pieces.
Yeah, and they're all interconnected.
Right.
But I think looking at all the sources that we've examined so far,
Yeah.
there is one thing that seems pretty clear.
Okay, what's that?
Global coal demand, it's probably going to plateau rather than continuing to grow.
Okay.
And this is largely driven by, those renewables that we talked about.
Right.
Becoming more popular and, improvements in energy efficiency.
Okay, so that's a pretty significant shift
It is.
from what the WEC was predicting back in 2004.
Back then, they thought it would just keep going up,
Right.
but now it seems like it's going to level off.
Okay, but are you saying that the future of coal is still uncertain,
I think so.
even if we're seeing a plateau in demand?
Yeah, I mean, those technological advancements that we discussed,
Right.
combined with whatever policy decisions are made
Yeah.
and the potential for those new applications, it could all drastically change coal's trajectory.
So for our listener out there, why should they care about any of this?
That's a good question.
Why does the future of coal even matter?
Right.
Especially in a world that seems to be moving towards, cleaner energy sources.
I mean, you're right. It might not be the most exciting topic
Oh, no.
to think about, but I think it's more relevant to our lives than we realize.
Okay.
Coal is still a major source of energy around the world,
Right.
and its impact on the environment and the economy is huge.
Okay.
So understanding the factors that are shaping its future
Yeah.
can help all of us make more informed decisions,
Okay, I see what you're saying.
whether as consumers or citizens or even as investors.
It affects us all.
And it does. It's all connected.
So knowing whether coal remains like a major player
Yeah.
or fades into the background
Right.
could really impact things like energy prices,
Yeah,
technological development, even global politics.
absolutely.
It's a lot bigger than just, that lump of coal we might picture in our minds.
It's a global issue.
Yeah. And it's important to remember that these are complex issues
Yeah,
with no easy answers.
definitely not.
But by engaging with these topics, understanding different perspectives,
Right.
understand all the different factors,
Yeah.
we can at least contribute to a more, informed and nuanced conversation
Absolutely.
about the future of energy.
It's a conversation worth having.
It is.
Yeah.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into the world of coal,
Okay.
what's the key takeaway?
What do I want our listeners to remember?
Yeah, what's something for them to think about?
Okay, well, I think the most important thing is that the future of coal isn't predetermined.
Okay.
It's being shaped by decisions that are being made right now.
Right.
By governments, by businesses, and by
So
individuals.
we all have a part to play.
Exactly. And as we've been discussing, there are these potential paths for coal to evolve,
Right.
moving from being primarily an energy source to becoming more of a valuable resource for other applications.
So instead of just thinking about whether coal is going to decline or not,
Right.
we should also be thinking about how it might transform.
Exactly. It's about adaptation.
Okay, so what are the potential implications of this shift?
From coal as a fuel to coal as a raw material?
Yeah, like for chemical processing.
That's a really great question.
It is.
It's something worth exploring further.
Okay, so we've been talking about how the future of coal might not be about, decline, but rather about transformation.
Right, exactly.
Specifically, we've been exploring the idea of coal shifting from being, mainly a fuel source to becoming, a key ingredient for all these different chemical processes.
And that shift raises some really, really big questions.
Yeah, about the implications.
Exactly, like
Uh,
what would that actually look like?
Right.
So let's just imagine for a moment
Oh.
that coal actually becomes a primary source for things like, synthetic fuels
Yeah.
and other chemical products.
Okay, I'm with you.
It could fundamentally reshape the whole manufacturing landscape.
Okay, so how would that happen?
Well, think about it this way.
Okay.
What if things like the plastics we use every day,
Yeah.
fertilizers, even like the medicines we rely on,
Wow.
they were all being made from coal instead of petroleum?
Wow.
That would require a massive adaptation of entire supply chains.
Right.
New industries would emerge, and some existing ones might really struggle to keep up.
So it would be a huge disruption.
It would be a major upheaval.
So the ripple effects wouldn't just be limited to the coal industry.
Right. It would go way beyond that.
It would impact a ton of different sectors.
Absolutely. And then there's the economic side of things, too.
So funny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. This shift away from, petroleum-based products
Yeah.
could have a huge impact on global trade. And, even geopolitical relationships.
Because
Countries with large coal reserves
right
might find themselves in a much more powerful position.
on the world stage, it's almost like we could see a whole new world order
Right.
based on who has access to coal instead of oil.
It's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. The implications are massive.
They are. And then, of course, there's always the environmental aspect to consider,
Right.
which is always complicated.
Yes, it is.
But on the one hand, using coal as a raw material for all this chemical production,
Yeah.
it could actually have the potential to reduce carbon emissions,
Interesting.
especially if those processes are designed with sustainability in mind right from the start.
Okay, so that sounds promising, but I'm guessing there's a but coming.
Well, yeah, it's rarely that simple.
Right.
On the other hand, we have to be honest about the fact that
Yeah.
extracting and processing coal,
Right.
it still has environmental impacts that
Yeah.
we can't just ignore.
What kind of things?
Well, we're talking about things like land use,
Okay.
water consumption, waste disposal.
Right.
All of those things need to be carefully considered.
So there are trade-offs.
There are always trade-offs.
It sounds like we need a more holistic approach.
We do.
One that considers all these interconnected factors, the economic benefits, the environmental risks, the social implications.
It's about finding that balance.
It is.
Yeah.
There's a lot to think about.
There's a lot to consider.
Okay, so where does this leave our listener?
That's a good question.
What's the big takeaway from all of this?
Well, if I had to sum it up in one sentence,
Okay.
I'd say that the future of coal,
Yeah.
and really the future of energy in general,
Right.
it's ultimately in our hands.
Okay.
It's a story that's still being written.
I like that.
Yeah, and the choices that we make today,
Right.
both individually and as a society,
Yeah.
will determine how that story unfolds.
It's a powerful message.
So, stay informed, engage in these conversations, make your voice heard, demand action from our leaders.
We can all play a role in creating a more sustainable future.
We can, and hopefully this deep dive has given our listeners the knowledge and the inspiration to do just that.
Well said. That's a great note to end on.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us.